Anyone with grenades, get ready to offer them up nice and generous-like. Throw for the Dreadnought's feet on my mark. Another mausoleum wall ceased to exist under the cannon's fury. This time, several of Darrick's platoon were caught in the blast, dissolved by the plasma washing over them. Trooper Jova howled as his arm disintegrated, and he stumbled out of his shattered cover to be scythed down by remnant-less fire. Trooper Haken and Sergeant Tain were half smothered by the white-hot, splashing plasma, not enough to kill them instantly. As they lay thrashing on the ground, bodies dissolving, Tarn's rifle sang out twice and headshotted them out of their misery. He looked over the wall again, sighting the Dreadnought. Off-white steam was gushing from the holes bored into the edge of the cone nozzle, and the coiled energy rings layered like a spine across the back of the cannon were glowing bright. "Now!" Darrick called. "Fire!" Tarn's men rose and opened fire. Grenades flew to smack around the feet of the Dreadnought, and lasfire sliced into the advancing remnant. Heretics were punched from their feet by the volley. The cluster of grenades, fragmentation bombs used to kill infantry and break up units of men, went off a moment later. The Dreadnought stalked through the resulting smoke, its greenish hull a little blackened in places but otherwise unharmed. "Damn it," Darrick said, getting ready to order a fallback. He had nothing that could wound the accursed thing, and the Dreadnought marched on. Its stomping advance suddenly halted as a high-caliber autocannon round hammered into its chest. Shards of armor splintered and flew aside as several more impacts followed. Tarn's men cheered as Deadman's Hand stalked past them, wading into the enemy. Vertain guided his sentinel from the relative cover of the mausoleums, triggers held down. Red ammo warnings flashed on his control console. "I'm firing hopes and prayers here," he voxed on the general channel. "If anyone has a heroic plan, now's the time to make it happen." "It's bleeding," Greer voxed. And it was. The Dreadnought's adamantite armored shell was, in many places, sheathed over in patches of foul, grey flesh. As the autocannon shells tore chunks of armor away, fragments of bloody bone and rancid meat flew aside too. Tarn's men renewed their return fire, cutting down remnant with lethal accuracy. Thade ran into cover alongside Darrick. With him were Rax and Ban Jevrian. "I heard you had a problem," the captain said. Venator platoon and the Kasrkin squad were dispersing alongside Darrick's men. Thade rose, fired his pistol at the remnant, but his gaze fell over the Dreadnought. One of Deadman's Hand was down before it, the sentinel's legs sheared off at the knees by the Dreadnought's massive chain blade. Thade saw the pilot, Greer, burst the roof of his walker open and scramble to get away. The Dreadnought's swinging chain blade put an end to that attempt. Greer's body fell in two gory halves. Deadman's Hand was backing away now, firing sporadically. Thade knew most of them needed to reload. The enemy war machine was limping, dragging one leg while blood, pus and a black fluid streamed from the gaping holes in its semi-organic armor. Even at a distance of 50 meters and more, it reeked of filth and waste. "That's got to die," Thade whispered. "My thoughts exactly," Darrick said. "Kasrkin, with me," the captain shouted, gunning his chainsword. 88th, covering fire." "You're joking." Tarn grabbed Thade's wrist, feeling the tension of cables and steel under the sleeve. "This is the stupidest thing you've ever done." With his free hand, Thade tapped the silver on his own helm. "Point taken," Darrick amended, letting go of Thade. "This is the second stupidest thing you've ever done." "Are we doing this or what?" Jevrian snapped. "There's a war going on, you know." "Watch it, glory boy!" Tarn smirked. "For the Emperor!" Thade shouted as he broke into a run. Jevrian and the Kasrkin sprinted after him, with Rax running alongside. What followed took place in the span of half a minute. To Tarn, watching as he and his men provided covering fire, it lasted a few seconds. To Thade, it felt like an hour. The Dreadnought was wounded. Deadman's hand had seen to that. He'd never have tried something this stupid otherwise. Thade led the Kasrkin across the open ground. The wounded Dreadnought turned in a ponderous arc, seeking to bring its plasma cannon to bear, but the Cadians were already too close. Thade's chain blade sang at the back of the war machine's knee joints, ripping through cables slick with filth. On the backswing, as the Dreadnought roared its anger, the whining sword slashed at a hip joint and dug in. Thade clenched his teeth as the blade bucked in his hands, the teeth ravaging the softer mechanics of the Dreadnought's waist joint. The Kasrkin fanned out, opening up with their hell guns and shooting into the surrounding remnant, forcing them back from Thade's insane melee. Jevrian ran at the Dreadnought's front, his power saber gleaming with crackling energy as he activated it. He fired his hell pistol at point-blank range, spearing holes in the great rotting hulk that towered above him. "Hurry the hell up!" he yelled. Thade soared, head turned from the outpourings of stinking, oily blood that gushed from the severed pipes and joint cables. Jevrian threw himself to the side as the wailing Dreadnought lashed out with its massive chain fist. Even prone, he was still in its arc, and at the last second, his power sword clashed against the falling blade to block certain death. The impact was beyond jarring. He felt something snap in his shoulder and was thrown 10 meters away, landing in a ragged heap of dented armor and Cadian oaths. He staggered to his feet, seeing stars and clutching the hilt of his shattered power blade. With a Kasrkin battle cry, he ran in again while still half dazed and with a broken arm. "Never fall! Never surrender!" The Kasrkin ringing the duelists shouted as they fired at the remnant daring to approach. Never outnumbered, never outgunned. Thade heaved back on his chainsword to pull it free and hammered it back into the mutilated hip joint with all his strength. The blade bounced for the ghost of a moment, then the whirring teeth snagged on the mechanics again, biting in with renewed ferocity. The Dreadnought tried to spin on its waist axis, but its attempt amounted to little more than a grinding of broken gears and squealing, mutilated joints. Thade felt the teeth bite solid metal, sawing into the core of the Dreadnought's leg, eating through the machine's metal bones. It began to stumble, slashing its chain fist wildly and unleashing a torrent of plasma fire at the ground. "Go!" Thade shouted, finally ripping his sword free. He ran back, clearing the Dreadnought's immediate radius of destruction as it sagged and staggered, lower to the ground now. Jevrian scaled the war machine one-handed. His broken blade, crackling with its power field unstable but still active, rammed into the staggering Dreadnought's frontal armor and sank to the hilt. The Kasrkin sergeant's gloved right hand sought purchase, finding it in an oozing hole made by an autocannon shell. He hauled himself up with one hand, his boot on his impaled sword hilt for support. As the Death Guard war machine flailed and staggered, half crippled and trying to shake off the human that clung to its front, Jevrian jammed the muzzle of his hell pistol into the finger-thin vision slit on the Dreadnought's ornate face and pulled the trigger. It fell. The pilot of the Dreadnought had once been an Astartes, interred within a walking adamantite tomb of ancient Mechanicus design. The pistol fire lanced into the withered husk that was all that remained of the warrior within, cutting the once man to pieces and ending the Dreadnought's last vestiges of life. A low whine rang out as the hulking mass powered down. Jevrian leapt clear in case it toppled. It didn't. It merely stood slouched, arms hanging dead at its sides. Having seen their champion fall, the remnant force was in full retreat. Cadian lasfire flashed after them, biting into exposed backs and sending more of the arch-enemy's troops to the ground. Thade and Jevrian walked back to Tarn, both out of breath. "Shitting hell," Derek said. "Yeah," agreed the Kasrkin sergeant. "My arm's broken," he said, just noticing. Thade smiled his crooked smile, absently patting the top of Rax's chrome head. "I hope we never see another one of those." 17 seconds later, a tank-sized pod, painted black and scorched blacker from planetfall, smashed into the ground 50 meters from the 88th front line. A wave of dirt was thrown up with the impact, some of the smaller earthen debris clattering off the Cadians' helmets and shoulder guards. With a snarl of moving parts, the sides of the drop pod opened like a flower facing the sun. The sides clanged onto the ground, becoming ramps by which the Raven Guard descended. The 10 giants came out, bolters up, seeking targets. After a moment, the 10 Astartes lowered their weapons in unison. They gathered around the mangled, dripping hulk of the dead Dreadnought. Faint vox clicks reached Thade's ears. The Astartes were talking to each other about what they were seeing. One of them moved over to the exhausted soldiers. Thade recognized him from his armor and made the sign of the Aquila. His men mirrored the salute. "Victory or death, brother captain." The Astartes didn't reply at once. Then, in the most human gesture Thade had ever seen from one of the Emperor's chosen, Corvain Valor hiked a thumb over his massive shoulder plate in the direction of the downed war machine. "Impressive work, Captain." Thade felt himself smiling as he spoke to the giant in black. "Thank you. Incidentally, you're welcome to help out with the next one."